The rogue Temethor awoke from uneasy dreams on the pebbled shore of a vast sea. The last thing he remembered was walking across the central square of the great city of Elsinox. Then a flash of multicolored light which enveloped him. Then nothing. He was here. As he stood awkwardly, Temethor saw 4 other individuals squinting against the blinding sun and stretching sore limbs. These 4 were perfect strangers to Temethor, and soon it became obvious that each was a stranger to the others. A barbarian from the mountains of Olenth, a wizard and ranger from the frontier town of Maneth, and a cleric from the Ouija's temple in the city of Dramos. Each remembered the same multicolored light enveloping them, and then nothing. We're here. Each was still carrying all of the possessions they had when they were enveloped by the mysterious light. With the ocean on one side and a high cliff on the other, the group decided to move along the beach, which ended in a huge jumble of boulders. But the ranger spotted a path snaking its way through the boulders and then up along the cliff face, which revealed a broad plain of green and yellow shrubs and grass, and a path that ran along the cliffside. In the far distance, the ranger spotted a group of humanoids moving towards them. In the moment that it was clear that these humanoids were a group of humans, they began shouting and screaming and rushed forward to attack. The attackers were simple peasants armed only with farm implements, but they were enraged with a lust that the barbarian was amazed by. But they were no match for skilled adventurers, and they quickly cut down all but one, an old man who they restrained in order to get information. The wizard shouted in the old man's face, asking him where they were and what had happened, and the old man froze, staring at the wizard as though for the first time. "Go to the Isle of Wesnos," the old man whispered with great effort, then lost himself again into peals of laughter and curses. "You're in hell," the old man told the wizard, "and you're all going to die." Hello again, gang. Your old pal KR King here, helping you homebrew your own D&D campaign. So, as you may have gathered from my colorful little introduction, this week I'm continuing the discussion from the last video in terms of a campaign premise, which I call Stranger in a Strange Land, in which the characters, at the beginning of the campaign, they roll them up, and then suddenly they find themselves in somewhere else with a group of strangers, don't know how they got there, and where they are. So what I thought I'd do today is give a sample of this campaign premise that I actually used about 8 or 9 years ago with version 3.5. My players called this the Land of Nevermore. It was actually the Isles of Wendros, but as we'll see in terms of getting teleported there, no one had ever escaped, so they gave it this tagline. But it was a fun campaign, and I think it demonstrates some of the ideas. In the last video I talked about it from the player's perspective, but this is from your perspective when you're creating this world, thinking about the way to do it that will be, easy in scope. The players they'll get there and they'll start to figure things out, and you won't get into a lot of complications and questions. Because, I think this premise first of all, it's kind of a fun one just to start a campaign with anyway, but it's also a great exemplar of the how and why of D&D in general. Because with D&D, you are dealing with a world in which the mythological is the actual. You have powerful beings who can shape the very structure of reality, just as people believed in the real world for many centuries. And so the question of how and why in the world of D&D centers upon the desire and motivations of these powerful creatures and the, forces of magic which basically bind together the fabric of reality, not the paltry rules of physics. All right, so looking at my example, what did we have? We had a world in which, the land, the sea, the sky, the fauna, the characters and their abilities and the way they feel about things, it all seems like the material plane. And then they talk to each other and they discover that they followed the premise that I recommend you use, especially the first time, but really, I think any time. It's instantaneous in terms of suddenly they're on the town square, then suddenly they're on the beach, and they have no memory of it. They simply have to deal with, what's going on right at that moment. So you as the GM, of course, know exactly what happened to the players. And in this example, I try to make it as simple as possible. Think about this. How could someone be walking down the street 1 second and then suddenly they're transported who knows where with no memory of what happened. And it's not just down the block or even 1,000 miles away. It's D&D, so it could be another plane of reality. Well, of course, being D&D, magic is the likeliest suspect, and in fact, really, it's the only suspect. Because, even if a person or persons decided they wanted to kidnap a group of people from disparate locations using conventional means, and tie them up and then put them on a cart or a ship or something and transport them thousands of miles away, highly unlikely, very elaborate, whatever. And if it's another plane of reality or dimension or something, it's magic. So this magical effect, I've decided, acts upon the person like, anesthesia. 1 minute you're counting backwards from 10, and the next you're in the recovery room. All right, so you've decided it has to be a magical effect or power that has transported the players from point A to point B. And I say effect or power just to further define this. A magical effect is some aspect of, the magic that infuses the very material world, all the planes, holds them all together in the world of D&D. Whereas I define a power as that magical effect or some set of effects that is manipulated by some sentient creature. So in terms of transporting people, a natural effect would be a gateway either between planes or points on a plane, a teleportation gate of some kind. And these are often defined in D&D, the modules and the manuals, as nexus points. So we'll use that terminology. Now, most often, a known nexus point is controlled by a powerful NPC. They usually build something like a keep or a temple or something, and they zealously guard this. So even though the nexus point itself is a magical effect, it becomes a power when wielded by someone who, builds something over it and sends people back and forth or transports themselves and their friends back and forth. And obviously any spell, whether arcane or divine or spell-like ability, which teleports people, is a power using the effect of teleportation. Now let's review. You've got people from disparate points, a barbarian from the north, the mountains of Olenth. You've got 2 characters from a city, Maneth, and 2 other individuals from different cities, and they were all transported here. So you'd say, well, it couldn't be a single gate. Did they all go to multiple gates or something? Because if it is a single gate, somehow you have to get the players all at this point, let's say the town square, at the same time, and they're supposedly strangers, right? How do you do that? Were they lured there by someone to go to the central square at 12 noon? Well, then someone's doing this, right? Which is fine, but I didn't want that. I wanted it to be something, some effect of the very place itself. I wanted it to be obvious to the players that there didn't seem to be anything in common. There was no common starting point, certainly. There was no, letter delivered to them. There was no dream that they had that unified them or whatever. It was merely that they were wherever they were and now they're here. Because it forces the players to just get started and not start arguing over, well, what was it that they said, or who could this be, or do you have any enemies or anything like that. Always trying to be simple. So what I did for this example was I created an effect based on the history of the place that the players were going. The Isles of Windrose, or as my players called it, the Land of Nevermore, was a pocket dimension created by a group of very powerful wizards. So these wizards were originally joined by their interest in the magic surrounding teleportation. And they began to combine their research, first, teleporting back and forth on the material planes, but eventually they began to discover ways to move between planes. And then they got to a point, kind of a limit in their individual power, and they came up with this idea of sort of a battery, an artifact which allowed them to combine their powers in one source and then use their powers separately with this battery, and it basically increased their abilities exponentially. And again, what this artifact is or how it was created, it's a MacGuffin, it's just a device. But now, through the tremendous increase in their power, they were able to create their own dimension where they could continue their research with total security. But being wizards, they were used to having people around them serving them meals, acolytes writing things down. So they began to bring their servants to the pocket dimension. The thing is, they didn't want anyone to know about it. So once you were here for good. Hence the Land of Nevermore. Well, they realized people wanted to have a world like the world they left, so they began to populate their pocket dimension with various fauna, tried to make it as much like home. Then they began to, bring in animals and whatnot, and then for their amusement, various creatures and things. So everything went along great. The wizards had their pocket dimension. They continued their research, but then they began to age. They had used magic to increase their lifespan, but everything must pass, and none of them were evil. None of them wanted to become a lich. So some in the group argued, you know what, we're going to have to teach some of our adepts, the colonists, we're going to have to show them the secret of this place. But others said, you know what, this power is tremendous, and in the wrong hands, those that don't have restraint, this could be a problem. But one wizard, the greatest of them all, Windros himself, said, you know what we should do? We all have the ability to use the wish spell. So we should combine our wishes with the power of the battery and wish that this had a permanent status. So they did this, and the plane continued to exist, and they passed on one by one, confident that their world would stay here. But of course, there's one flaw in their plan. As always in the world of D&D, my friends. The wizards thought that they had created this pocket dimension solely from their calculations and understanding of the magic that underlies the fabric of reality, but in fact, they had done this largely on instinct, and there were subtle fluctuations in the frequencies between the planes that they had made these adjustments just intuitively without realizing it. But they didn't know this when they made the wish spell, and so the battery was frozen in time, and slowly but surely, over the centuries, the attunement began to get out of alignment. And this is the why of why creatures like the players are suddenly being transported to the Land of Nevermore, because as the attunement, as it kind of gets out of whack, a little micro nexus points appear in various planes, and whoever happens to be there is sucked through. And sometimes these frequencies are stronger than others, and hence nexus points open up at the same time at different locations. And this is how players could be transported from multiple locations simultaneously without some elaborate explanation. The wish spell just wasn't holding. Now, I did add one wrinkle to this, the ticking clock of the insane peasants. And what the players discover as they wander through the Land of Nevermore is that there are people that are being transported, that the frequencies also affect your mind. You're out of balance after you've been transported, and I think it was a month or 2 months, you began to go insane. The old man they met on the beach was in fact a wizard who was just wandering with these peasants all insane, sort of the zombie effect where it draws together different people. But for a moment he managed to get his mind together and told them to go to the Isle of Windros, which was the island home of one of the wizards, who the people that actually live in Nevermore are very aware of. They still kind of worship these wizards as great teachers of the past. But here's the thing, you don't have to do this, because I like ticking clocks. It just puts an added pressure on the players when they're already sort of in this what situation is kind of deadly. You don't have to do that. Just let them explore the world and try to figure out how are we going to get back. Now, when I did this campaign, 2012 through 2013, I started the players all at 5th level. And then they ran through the world. They went to the Isle of Windros, and they figured out how to use these rings of attunement that allowed them not to go insane. There was this mega dungeon there. They met all sorts of creatures. Creatures are being teleported in. So all sorts of nasties from, basically the material plane, but all sorts of other places. And again, now you have a mega dungeon where it makes sense. Things are just zapped in there, sometimes in front of the players and whatnot. And I had a silver dragon who was there who helped the players, and then I had a mind flayer who was in another mega dungeon, and one of the wizards who was trying to figure out how to control the battery. And that's what makes the why of the random teleport thing so fun. So basically the players have to go to each island, a task. I think there were 5 wizards. They had to get a little crystal that contained part of the wizard's soul. Because here's the thing. The gods were angry at the hubris of these wizards to create this pocket dimension, to have all these people here that had to live their lives. So in order for them to maintain this forever, they sort of had to be imprisoned in their own battery until the gods decided, okay, you've paid your price. And that, of course, is pure D&D. All right, so there's my sample Strangers in a Strange Land premise. If you like what you've seen, please subscribe to my channel. I'm always looking for more. And leave some comments, because I love to read them and answer them. But most importantly, my friends, keep playing D&D and tell somebody else about it.